I'm Yvonne Brathwaite Burke. When I served in the legislature as Yvonne Brathwaite, as a matter of fact, I served as Yvonne Watson Brathwaite. I was elected from Los Angeles in 1967. I served for 3 terms from 1967 to 72. I represented an area, the airport, Crenshaw, a little bit of Inglewood, and a little bit of Culver City, but the Crenshaw area and many of the people who are part of unincorporated areas like Ladera Heights. I had a really wonderful experience there. And then I went on to serve in the United States House of Representatives. I was not one who really always looked forward to serving in legislature or Congress. I was an attorney and a very active attorney, and I was very involved in the civil rights movement and in civil rights litigation. I just happened to come along at a time after 1965 when there was the Los Angeles Watts riots, that there was a real eagerness to find new people to run for office. And of course, there were no women necessarily running for office or serving in the legislature. When I went there, there was one woman who had been there, Pauline Davis, and March Fong Yu and I became number 2 and number 3 at the time. I'm a native Californian. I was born in Los Angeles. I went to school in, well, it was 20th Street School, then 32nd Street School across from USC. I then went on to John Adams and graduated from Manual Arts High School, and I was very involved as a debater and declamation and involved in contests, and whether it was poetry reading or whether it was debate, I was very, very involved and spent a great deal of my high school years in those kinds of endeavors, and not because I was planning to go into politics, even though I have to tell you I was a girls judge at Manual Arts and the vice president of the student body. So I probably have to admit that I was involved in high school in a very political way. After high school, I started at Berkeley. I went to Berkeley for 2 years studying political science, then transferred down to UCLA. And I came down to UCLA because by that time I knew I was going to law school and I needed to save the money. So I graduated from UCLA in political science and then went on to USC Law School.
Legislator.
I was a lawyer from the time that I was admitted to the bar, and I was very active as a lawyer. Actually, for a long time I served as a deputy corporation commissioner for the state of California. So that's how I got my background in corporate. But I also was very involved in real estate, handled many eminent domain cases, and the civil rights case that was most important in my life was the integration of the realty boards. The Southwest Realty Board was one that was segregated, and I filed that lawsuit with 2 people who were energetic realty people who wanted to do something about their profession. Ultimately, the Justice Department came in and took it over, and as a result, those realty boards were integrated. When I ran for office, obviously there were no women in the legislature and the Congress or in the Los Angeles City Council. There was one woman, Roz Wyman. So it was unusual for women to run. But the fact that I was an attorney gave me a little advantage. I think people saw that name. I was very fortunate also. My dad, who had been a charter member of Service Employees Union, his union backed me. And I was able to get so many community people who came together and worked with me. I ran against a person who was very involved in the Democratic Party. I had not been involved that much. I belonged to a Democratic club. That was about it. And I ran against someone who was a lobbyist and had been very close to the existing assemblyman who retired. And when he retired, he kind of passed it on to his administrative assistant. But I was able to win. It was not an easy campaign. I had a very difficult campaign, and in the general election ran against a John Birch member. So it was really interesting campaign. The decision for me to run was made by a group. I was on the staff of the McCone Commission that was investigating the Watts riots. The person who was the assistant chief counsel, Sam Williams, was a person who was very convinced that it was necessary for young people to get involved in politics and to run for office. So as we sat there looking at all of the issues of the McCone Commission and writing up that report, we discussed politics a lot, and they said, Yvonne, you're the one who should run. So I was it, and I ran. I have to tell you that my platform when I ran was heavily consumer oriented. Very interesting story. Since I was so consumer oriented, the lobbyists in those days they had blue and green stamps. They were very eager to find out if I was going to eliminate those stamps, which I wasn't, of course. I was interested in helping consumers, but not necessary to eliminate the stamps. I was interested in helping seniors and people who were in homes that were they weren't regulated by the state. And often the kind of facilities that they were in was below par. But people came to me and asked if I would introduce legislation to license board and care homes, and I introduced it, and it was passed. I think the first bill that really made a difference was there were parents who said, you know, you can't get insurance to cover the first six weeks of a baby's life. So I introduced that. I was able to get it through because I was on finance and insurance and on health, and that certainly had made a lot of difference for people. Much of the legislation came to me from others. The whole idea of child care facilities in our colleges and universities. Integrating highway patrol, which many people remember me for, bringing women into the highway patrol. So I was at a crucial time in California, where women were emerging and where rights for individuals were emerging, and I was fortunate I was able to carry a lot of that legislation. I really thought that my biggest obstacle was convincing many people who didn't understand some of the things that women needed. Convincing them also of the need for greater involvement of government in housing and in developing housing. So I worked with Willie Brown and with a whole group of people. We toured the whole United States and looked at all of the ways that other states were involved in providing finance for housing. As a result, I introduced the Housing Finance Bill for bonds to provide housing. I was unable to get it passed, but fortunately, the person who came after me got it passed and signed. No question, there is one big thing that affected, I believe, the entire state of California that occurred when I was there. It was during the time that I was there that California started selling off some of its buildings and closed many of the mental health facilities. The idea at the time was that, and of course Assemblyman Latterman, who was very sincere and working with others, believed that there would be community facilities for those who were removed from the mental health institutions. The governor, I really think, believed that there would be community facilities, but those facilities did not come about. And what we see today is many people who should be in facilities to assist them and to solve their problems are homeless. There are people who commit crimes in some instances because they don't have the services and they're not in a secured environment. So that was one of the things that I wish had never happened while I was there. I hope that anyone who listens to me, if they have ideas or if they're dedicated to something that they believe can change other people's lives or the quality of our state, I would hope that they are involved. Maybe they should run for office. Maybe they should get involved in their community. maybe they should be one of those voices that's heard. So I would hope that you would say, I can make a difference, and I'm going to. I would say to a woman who is thinking about getting involved in politics to first of all, make sure you're involved in the community. Get involved in some issue so that people can identify you with that issue. I also say prepare yourself. Today there are all kinds of seminars that you can attend to find out how you raise money, because that's tough and you need to learn how to do it. Familiarize a new person with issues, and that's important as well. So I think you have to kind of take advantage of the many things that are available today, whether it's on the internet, these organizations that are women that are trying to urge other women to run. Take advantage of everything and put it together, but ultimately it has to be your way.
This way.
While I was in office, I was able to get legislation passed for child care centers in colleges. I was able to make it possible for a baby to get insurance at the time of birth, and parents then did not have that obligation if they had a premature baby that they couldn't get insurance. I was able to do a number of things to protect the elderly and the disabled by licensing, but I was also able to try to start new ideas and a number of things that have had long reach in terms of housing, any number of them, including recognizing the fact that you could have not just housing built on a lot, but you could have mobile housing brought in and it could be utilized. So that whole law I developed. Of course, I also was able to develop a lot of relocation assistance with eminent domain. It did not exist. The federal government had it, but I was able, since I represented the airport, to introduce relocation assistance for people near the airport, and now all people who are subject to eminent domain get relocation assistance. Not taken on maybe quite so many issues, but I would have stuck with some of those that I did take on and tried harder to get them passed. Well, I think the whole issue in terms of housing finance, I could have possibly convinced a few more people and to get that through the administration, which I was not able to do. I also introduced unemployment insurance for farm workers, and that took many, many, many years before that whole idea was adopted. I hope that people remember me as someone who is an activist, but who also brings people together and is able to put together coalitions and bringing together people with different ideas, but compromising those ideas in order to have a good result. So I hope that's what people remember, what was my contribution.
Otherwise,
you have to remember that when I was in office, there were only 3 women in the entire legislature, and the legislature was not geared for women. There were all kinds of activities that they had, parties and other things. And I can remember, as far as March Fong and I, our attitude was we should be part of it. Pauline Davis accepted. Her husband had been a legislator. She accepted things as they were and accepted it was a man's world. But when we came there, we didn't think that. And I can remember we wanted to go to the men's party, and the sergeant-at-arms came by and kneeled at my desk and said, you know, there's a case of whiskey in your car. Why don't you have your own party?